North Sentinel Island sits in the Bay of Bengal, part of the Andaman Archipelago administered by India. It's approximately 60 square kilometers. It has a beach, a forest, and somewhere between 50 and 400 people living on it. The exact number is unknown because nobody has been able to get close enough to count. The Sentinelese have lived on this island for an estimated 60,000 years. They had had contact with the outside world on a handful of documented occasions. Every single contact ended the same way, with the Sentinelese making it unambiguously clear that outsiders are not welcome. In 1896, an escaped convict from the British colonial penal colony on nearby South Andaman Island washed ashore on North Sentinel Island. His body was found on the beach days later with his throat cut. In 1974, a National Geographic documentary crew approached the island by boat. They were met with a volley of arrows. The director was struck in the thigh. In 1981, a cargo ship called the Primrose ran aground on the reef surrounding the island. The crew sheltered on the grounded ship for several days while Sentinelese men gathered on the beach below them, visibly constructing boats and carrying weapons. The crew sent a distress signal. A helicopter eventually evacuated them. The Sentinelese began boarding the wreck of the Primrose within hours of the crew's departure. The ship's rusted hulk is still visible on the reef today. In 2006, two fishermen fell asleep in their boat near the island after a night of illegal fishing. Their boat drifted into the shallows overnight. They were killed in the morning. The Indian Coast Guard helicopter that came to retrieve their bodies was driven off by arrows before it could land. In 2018, American missionary John Allen Shaw paid local fishermen to take him close to the island. He attempted to make contact on multiple occasions over several days, approaching by kayak. On his final approach, he was killed. His body was never recovered. His notebook entries, retrieved from the fisherman, described previous approaches in which he was shot at and had an arrow pierce his waterproof Bible. Poveglia is a small island in the Venetian lagoon, sitting between Venice and the Lido. From a distance, it looks like many of the other islands in the lagoon, quiet, green, dotted with old buildings. The Italian government banned public access to it in the 20th century. It has been largely uninhabited for decades. The island's history explains why. During the Roman era, Poveglia was used to isolate plague victims. People suspected of carrying disease were sent there and left. This practice continued and intensified during the Black Death in the 14th century, when plague victims from Venice and the surrounding mainland were transported to Poveglia in large numbers. Those who died there were buried in mass graves or burned in large pyres on the island's surface. It is estimated that over 160,000 people died on Poveglia across its history as a plague quarantine station. The soil is reportedly composed partly of human ash and bone. Construction projects on the island have repeatedly unearthed human remains in large quantities. In 1922, the island's existing buildings were converted into a psychiatric hospital. It operated for several decades. Former staff members have given accounts, not verifiable, not official, of a doctor who conducted experiments on patients and who allegedly threw himself from the hospital's bell tower after what witnesses described as a breakdown. The bell tower still stands. The hospital closed in 1968. The Italian government briefly attempted to auction the island in 2014 to raise funds, with the winning bidder acquiring a 99-year lease. The auction attracted international attention and no shortage of buyers fascinated by the island's reputation. The winning bidder's development plans were subsequently blocked by local authorities. The island remains closed, deteriorating, and inaccessible to the public. The Farallon Islands are a group of rocky outcroppings sitting 43 kilometers off the coast of San Francisco. They are visible from the city on clear days. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service administers them as a national wildlife refuge. Access is restricted to authorized researchers only. The islands are home to one of the largest seabird colonies on the Pacific coast of North America, as well as significant populations of marine mammals. The restriction exists primarily to protect the wildlife from human disturbance. There is a second reason the islands are restricted that receives less attention. Between 1946 and 1970, the United States military used the waters around the Farallon Islands as a disposal site for radioactive waste. Approximately 47,500 drums of low-level radioactive material were dumped in the ocean surrounding the islands. Old laboratory equipment, contaminated clothing, and nuclear research byproducts from facilities including the University of California. The drums were loaded onto barges and thrown overboard. Some were reportedly shot with rifles when they failed to sink. The exact condition of the drums is not fully known. Many have deteriorated. The sediment around the dump sites is contaminated. The area is also one of the most productive great white shark feeding grounds on the Pacific coast of North America. Large aggregations of great white sharks gather seasonally around the islands to feed on the seal and sea lion populations. The combination of radioactive waste on the seafloor and one of the highest concentrations of great white sharks on Earth makes the Farallon Islands a location that the United States government has decided humans do not need to visit. Miyake-jima is a volcanic island approximately 180 kilometers south of Tokyo. It has a population of around 2,500 people. It also has an active volcano, Mount Oyama, that has erupted repeatedly throughout recorded history, most recently and significantly in 2000. The 2000 eruption was not a single event. It was a prolonged crisis that began in late June and continued for months. Thousands of small earthquakes preceded the main eruption. When Oyama erupted in July, it produced a massive ash column and began releasing sulfur dioxide gas continuously, not in a single burst, but as an ongoing emission that persisted for years. The entire population of 3,800 residents was evacuated in September 2000. They were not allowed to return for 4.5 years. When residents did return in 2005, it was under a condition that remains in effect today. Every resident of Miyake-jima is required by law to carry a gas mask at all times. The gas masks are not a precaution. Mount Oyama continues to emit sulfur dioxide at levels that periodically spike high enough to be immediately dangerous. Alarms sound across the island when concentrations reach dangerous levels. Residents are required to put their masks on and move to designated shelter areas. This happens regularly. Visiting Miyake-jima is not forbidden. Tourists do go there, drawn by the diving, the wildlife, and the volcano. They are issued gas masks on arrival. The island's tourist information materials include instructions on what to do when the gas alarm sounds. The restricted zones on the island are the areas immediately surrounding the volcano's summit, where sulfur dioxide concentrations are consistently lethal without protection, and where the terrain itself has been rendered unstable by decades of eruptions. These areas are permanently closed. The rest of the island operates under the permanent condition of being one alarm away from an emergency evacuation. Ilha da Queimada Grande sits 35 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo. It's 43 hectares. The Brazilian Navy estimates it contains between 1 and 5 venomous snakes per square meter. The snake is the golden lancehead pit viper, a species that exists nowhere else on Earth. It evolved in isolation after the island separated from the mainland approximately 11,000 years ago. With no ground predators, the population grew to a density that has no equivalent anywhere else on the planet. The Brazilian government has banned civilian access. The Navy maintains a lighthouse on the island and conducts periodic visits. Researchers with specific permits are occasionally allowed access under strict conditions. The last lighthouse keeper family reportedly died when snakes entered their home through windows. The lighthouse has been automated since. The lancehead's venom is hemotoxic and fast-acting. It is capable of killing prey before it can fly or swim away, an adaptation to an island where prey is almost exclusively migratory birds that land briefly. The speed and potency of the venom reflect the evolutionary pressure of needing to kill something that could be airborne again in seconds. Several illegal visits have occurred over the years. Some of those visitors did not return. Gruinard Island is a small, oval island off the northwest coast of Scotland, approximately 2 kilometers long. For 48 years, between 1942 and 1990, it was listed on British Admiralty charts with a single designation: danger, do not land. During World War II, the British government used Gruinard as a test site for biological weapons, specifically anthrax. Bombs containing anthrax spores were detonated on the island, while sheep were tethered nearby to assess the weapon's effectiveness. The tests were successful in the sense that the sheep died. They were unsuccessful in the sense that anthrax spores are extraordinarily resilient. They can survive in soil for decades, potentially centuries. After the tests, the island was simply left, contaminated, uninhabited. The warning designation on the charts was the entirety of the safety measure. In 1981, a package containing Gruinard soil was delivered to a government research facility, with a note stating that the contamination would be spread to the mainland unless the island was decontaminated. The British government responded by actually decontaminating the island. 280 tons of formaldehyde solution diluted in seawater were sprayed across the entire surface. The topsoil in the most heavily contaminated areas was removed and incinerated. The island was declared safe in 1990. A government scientist walked across it carrying a lamp to demonstrate that it was no longer contaminated. It was removed from restricted status and technically became accessible. It remains uninhabited. No development has occurred. The ferry services that pass nearby do not stop there. It is accessible in theory and avoided in practice. An island that spent 48 years as a biological weapons test site and was decontaminated with industrial quantities of formaldehyde, sitting quietly off the Scottish coast.